Joining us now is Ressa, an investigative journalist who's spent the last 3 decades reporting across Asia. She's also the co-founder of Rappler, a digital news site in the Philippines.
Joining us as well is the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine, Ravi Agrawal. Good to have both of you with us. Maria, let me go to you first of all, because remember, of course, 1 year after 9/11, what do we see? We see the Bali bombings. And you have followed the trail of terror across Southeast Asia. Take us back to that time and those connections between groups like Jemaah Islamiyah, other groups in Southeast Asia, and Al-Qaeda and the terror networks in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
So much, but a lot of it was when 9/11 happened. It was a memory for me. I was on a treadmill in Jakarta, and I called Atlanta and said, you have to send me to Manila, because it was a 1995 interrogation report of probably the first guy recruited by the architect of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the first pilot. Right? His name is Abdul Hakim Murad. He's still in a U.S. maximum security prison today. It's no coincidence that every single major Al-Qaeda plot from 1993 to 2003 had some connection to the Philippines, and then to this architect, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, and his nephew, Ramzi Youssef, who came here in the Philippines right after the 1993 truck bombing of the World Trade Center to train the Abu Sayyaf, right? So all of this stuff connected to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the plots that were hatched out by the people under him, that includes the shoe bomber. If you remember this, first tested by Ramzi Youssef in the Philippines in a successful mid-air explosion in 1994. Mohammed had his recruit, Richard Reed, who was nicknamed the shoe bomber, try it again in 2001 unsuccessfully. Lots of other liquid bomb tests. I did a lot of that with you, with Stan, when we were at CNN, and I was basically following the trail. And from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, you then had the 4 Mantikis in Southeast Asia. So essentially what Osama bin Laden was able to do is to take homegrown organizations and put them into connect them in a global jihad to fuel this anti-American jihad to the damage, essentially damaging those homegrown groups.
Ravi, can I bring you in here? Because you, of course, reported South Asia, you reported in India. We've seen similar attacks inside India. I want you to focus on Pakistan. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, we heard Maria talking about there, instrumental in plotting the 9/11 attacks. The Southeast Asian terrorist groups have roots in Pakistan. Pakistan is believed to be a great supporter of the Taliban. Bin Laden is found and killed living inside Pakistan. And yet Pakistan is meant to be an ally of the United States. Talk about Pakistan's role and what Pakistan's role is going forward now the Taliban is in control in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it seems like Pakistan has sort of become expert at sort of being the arsonist, but then also selling itself as the firefighter that's fixing the fires that have been set, around the world, and in part by its funding, in part by many of the groups that it has enabled for years. And we've seen this, of course, in Afghanistan, we've seen this in Kashmir, we've seen this in many parts around the world. The challenge with all of this, I think, is that because Pakistan is a nuclear state, it has been able to, for many years now, spook the United States and other powerful countries into thinking that, look, we have to treat this country differently. We have to listen to it when it says that it needs money to build its security state. We have to listen to it when it says that it can be part of the solution. And Pakistan has gotten very good at playing this double game of saying one thing to the West, that it believes in democracy, that it wants to fight terrorism, because after all, its own people are affected by it as well. It has gotten good at doing that, and yet also finding ways to fund militant Islam in Afghanistan and other parts of the world, Kashmir as well.
Maria, if I can come to you, your journalism has been a source of much annoyance for your president, who has seen to it that you were charged and brought to book. And I look at that and I wonder whether or not there's a connection that you might draw between that, the rise of that kind of authoritarian populist, that sort of mad populist in the Philippines, and the forces of fear and division that were unleashed on 9/11?
Absolutely. I mean, the two biggest stories I think that I unraveled, right? 9/11. So just to jump off Ravi, I mean, Abu Tabad, where Osama bin Laden was killed, right before that happened, there was an Indonesian, somebody who was wanted, was also arrested in there, very close to the military industrial complex. Anyway, so the connection, the two biggest stories I've handled in my 35-year career was 9/11, seeing this and unraveling the thread of the connections from the Philippines and Southeast Asia to this global jihad. And then the second one is in 2016, in discovering these networks of disinformation, information operations that target people on social media, exploit the weaknesses of the algorithms of social media that are connected to geopolitical power play. They both play on citizens' fears. They amplify the worst of our fears to kind of create an us against them mentality. And the hardest part is after 9/11, it essentially blew up the old, I'm sorry to use that word, but it changed the Cold War paradigm of the security system, like kind of global security. And it brought asymmetric warfare, right? Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda called it death by 1,000 cuts. But now you come after 2016 and you see the way nation states have been exploiting these asymmetrical warfare tactics, many of them against their own citizens, including here in the Philippines. This is something we've proven in our investigative reports, showing the data of the disinformation networks, the influence operations against citizens and states. Last September 2020, Chinese influence operations, so these are coming from China. This was taken down by Facebook. These Chinese influence operations were creating fake accounts using AI generated photos for the US presidential elections. They were targeting Filipinos in terms of campaigning for next year's presidential elections for the daughter of President Duterte. And then finally, they were attacking me. I'm only one journalist. I joke and say that the new terrorists using the same tactics, but far different, now in the hands of some states, changing our world dramatically.
Ravi, a final thought from you, from where you sit now in New York, and we've been discussing this throughout the program. It is front and centre, this question now, the future of the United States. Is it still able to exercise its power? Is it still the world's cop, if you like? Or is it a diminished nation? And what does that mean for the world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. On the one hand, there's a very powerful sort of group of thinkers in America, the restrainers who, have been calling for the end of forever wars for some time. They are in the ascendancy in the United States in that it has now become very popular to say that the United States should not be involved in long, endless wars around the world in arenas where they're not able to sort of nation build or build alliances that they would like. That is a thought and a strain of thinking, I think, that has grown here, but you can't ignore the fact that the alternative is what? As we'll continue to see, in the coming months and years, there will be terrorist attacks in arenas around the world that could impact U.S. interests. And America will then need to figure out how it needs to engage with it. One thing, however, I think in terms of a lesson from 9/11 that might inform U.S. policymakers going forward is it's one thing to have an attack, so 9/11 or any of the other bombings that you mentioned. The response is just as important. And Osama bin Laden in his wildest dreams would not have imagined that for the next 20 years, the United States would take the trajectory that it did, that it would soil itself with Guantanamo. It would sort of get so heavily involved in a war on terror that would hurt itself in terms of blood and treasure, and so much else in terms of lost prestige, and also distracting it from other crucial issues such as climate change and the rise of China. There's an acceptance now in Washington that that was self-defeating, and that Washington needs to learn lessons from 9/11 and think of a different plan going forward. After all, that is what China is doing right now.
Ravi, good to see you again. Thank you again for sharing your expertise, your experience with us. And Maria, thank you again as well. Nice to see you.
Lovely to meet you both.